I've always believed that neighborhoods have their own rhythm, their own quiet routines. People mow their lawns on Sundays, take out the trash on Wednesdays, walk their dogs in the evenings. You get used to seeing the same faces at the same times, doing the same things. That's why when something doesn't fit, when someone breaks the rhythm, you notice. For me, that someone was Mr. Delaney. He lived alone in the house behind mine, an old man with a stiff gait and a habit of wearing the same faded flannel shirt no matter the season. I barely ever saw him in the daytime, but at night, I'd catch glimpses of him through my back window, moving around his yard with a shovel in hand. First, I chalked it up to gardening. Maybe he had insomnia and preferred to work when it was cool outside. But he wasn't planting anything. He was digging, always in different spots, always covering the holes back up before dawn. I told myself it wasn't my business. Maybe he was just eccentric. Maybe he had a weird hobby. But then, one night, I saw something I couldn't ignore. It was past midnight, and I was closing my kitchen window when I noticed him out there again. Only this time, he wasn't just digging. He was struggling to carry something. A large, lumpy shape wrapped in a tarp. He was hunched over, dragging it across the yard with slow, steady steps before dropping it into one of his freshly dug holes. My stomach twisted. It was too big to be a bag of leaves, too heavy for him to carry without effort. And the way he looked around before covering it up, the urgency in his movements, told me he didn't want anyone seeing what he was doing. I barely slept that night. By morning, curiosity had turned into something worse. I needed to know what was in that hole, not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid of what it might be. I waited until I saw him leave the house. He didn't go out often, but when he did, he was gone for hours. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I grabbed a shovel and climbed over the fence. The dirt was still loose. It didn't take much effort to dig, and with every scoop, my hands shook a little more. A foot down, my shovel hit something soft. I reached in, fingers trembling, and pulled out a dirty, weathered canvas bag. It wasn't heavy, but it had weight, something solid shifting inside. I hesitated before opening it, my heart slamming against my ribs. Inside, I found wallets. A dozen of them, maybe more. Old, cracked leather, worn edges, faded driver's licenses stuffed into plastic sleeves. Some looked ancient, the photos inside yellowing and curled. Others were more recent. I rifled through them, my breath coming in short gasps. Different names, different faces, none of them familiar. And then I saw something at the bottom of the bag. A smaller pouch cinched tight with twine. I pulled it out and loosened the knot. Something spilled into my palm. Teeth. Not animal teeth. Human. Some with fillings, some worn down from age. All of them clean. Too clean. I dropped the bag and scrambled back, my vision tunneling. My body felt cold, too light, as if I might float away if I didn't grip the earth beneath me. Mr. Delaney wasn't gardening. He was burying things. And if he was burying this, what else had he buried? I ran back to my house and called the police. They arrived within minutes. I watched from my window as officers swarmed his yard, digging up more than just that one hole. They unearthed bags of old identification, watches, jewelry, bones. And then they went inside his house. He had been living under a fake name. The real Mr. Delaney had died decades ago. The man in that house, my quiet, reclusive neighbor, had been someone else entirely. Someone wanted in multiple states. Someone who had been slipping through the cracks for years, moving from place to place, taking people with him before disappearing again. The news spread fast. Neighbors who had known him for years, who had waved at him, chatted over fences, were left shaken. No one knew how long he had been doing this, how many people he had taken. They never found them all. Sometimes, late at night, I still catch myself looking out the window, half expecting to see him standing in his yard with a shovel in hand, digging. There's a certain unease that comes with moving into a new house. At night, the walls feel unfamiliar, the air too still, and every little noise makes you pause. It's like the house hasn't decided to accept you yet, or maybe you haven't accepted it. I moved in on a cloudy afternoon, spending the day hauling boxes inside, sweating through my shirt, and barely making a dent in the unpacking. By the time the sun started setting, I was exhausted. I had planned to order a pizza, crack open a beer, and call it a night. Then my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't know anyone here. The neighborhood seemed quiet, clean-cut lawns, well-kept porches, the kind of place where people waved politely but kept to themselves. When I opened the door, a man stood there, late 40s, maybe early 50s, short brown hair going gray at the edges, a lean face that should have looked friendly but didn't. He smiled wide, said his name was Greg, my new neighbor. He welcomed me to the neighborhood, making small talk about how it was a great place to live. Then he asked if I'd had the electrical panel checked since moving in. The question threw me off. He explained he was a utility technician, had been for years, said houses like mine, the older ones, often had faulty wiring, bad grounding, outdated circuits. He said he could take a look if I wanted, just to make sure everything was safe. I told him I'd think about it. Then he asked if I lived alone. It wasn't just a casual question. There was something odd about the way he said it, like he was weighing my answer before I even gave it. I forced a smile and shook my head, said my roommate worked nights. His eyes lingered on mine for a second too long. Then he gave a short nod, told me to let him know if I ever needed anything. That was the first time I felt it, that gnawing instinct in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I saw him around. Once, while I was bringing in groceries, he was in his front yard, wiping down his truck. I caught him looking my way, but as soon as our eyes met, he gave me that same easy smile. Another time, I left for a late-night run to the gas station, and when I came back, his porch light was still on. He was standing there, drinking a beer, eyes flicking toward my house as I parked. Then there were the questions. Every time I ran into him, he had another one. Did I have a security system? Did I keep my windows locked at night? Did I know where my gas shutoff valve was? I stopped answering. I stopped opening my blinds. And when I woke up to a noise in the middle of the night, I stopped assuming it was just the house settling. The night it happened, I had just gone to bed. I wasn't asleep yet, just lying there, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it, a rattling sound. First, I thought it was the wind. The back door was old. Maybe the frame had shifted. Then it happened again. A slow shake, like someone testing the handle. I sat up, heart pounding, reached for my phone. The security light flipped on outside. Through the curtains, I saw movement. A shadow near the back door. Someone crouched, fiddling with the lock. I called the police. The longest 5 minutes of my life. I stayed frozen in the dark, gripping the baseball bat I kept by the bed, barely breathing as the noise continued. Then, sirens. I saw him run. He bolted toward the side of the house, but the cops were already there. They tackled him near the driveway. It was Greg. They found his truck parked down the street. Inside, they found crowbars, lockpicks, bolt cutters, a stolen license plate, and a list, 6 addresses. One of them was mine, so were a few other houses on the block. He had been planning this, watching, figuring out who lived alone, which houses had security systems, which doors stayed locked. The police told me I was lucky. I don't feel lucky. Even with him gone, the house doesn't feel like mine anymore. It feels like a place someone else had plans for. If you're drawn to tales like these, consider subscribing to Spectral for more chilling entries waiting to be uncovered. And if you have your own haunting story that you'd like featured in an upcoming compilation, we'd love to hear it. Just email us at spectralentries@gmail.com. Now, let's get back to the video. Moving into a new apartment always feels a little strange at first. You're surrounded by someone else's choices. Paint colors, light fixtures, the odd dent in the wall that makes you wonder what happened there. Takes time before it feels like yours. This place was small but decent. A one-bedroom in an older building with creaky floors and thin walls. Not perfect, but affordable and in a safe neighborhood. That's what mattered. The landlord, Mr. Holloway, lived on the first floor. He was in his 60s, maybe 70s, thin, with watery blue eyes and a polite but unnerving habit of staring too long when you talked. When I signed the lease, he mentioned he liked to keep an eye on things, make sure his tenants were comfortable. I took it as standard small building landlord talk, until I moved in. The first day, he knocked on my door just as I finished unpacking. Asked if everything was in working order. Fair enough. The second day, he stopped me as I left for work. Asked what hours I'd be gone. Said he liked to keep track of when people were in and out for security reasons. By the end of the first week, I had seen him half a dozen times. Each time, the questions felt a little more personal. What did I do for work? Was I single? Did I sleep with the bedroom door locked? I laughed at that one, brushing it off as an old man's awkward attempt at humor. But later, lying in bed, I replayed the conversation in my head. Something about it stuck with me. The first time I woke up to a sound at my door, I convinced myself I imagined it. Faint click, the knob turning slightly. I held my breath, staring into the dark. Nothing. I got up, checked the locks. Everything was secure. The old building probably just creaked at night. I told myself that again when it happened the next night. And the night after that. One night, I stayed up later than usual, reading in bed. It was almost 2 a.m. when I heard it, a key sliding into the lock. My heart stopped. I sat up, barely breathing, watching the door from the shadows of my bed. The handle turned. Slowly, deliberately, the door creaked open an inch. I saw nothing but darkness beyond the crack. For a moment, the silence stretched impossibly long. Then, the door slammed shut, not like someone pulled it closed, but like they panicked and let go too fast. I heard quick, retreating footsteps down the hall. The next morning, I went straight to a hardware store and bought a security camera. I installed it just above my door, angled perfectly to catch anyone who approached. That night, I went to bed early. I forced myself to sleep, knowing I'd have an answer in the morning. When I checked the footage, my hands went cold. At 3:14 a.m., Mr. Holloway appeared in the frame. He was holding a key. He unlocked my door, turned the handle, and pushed it open just slightly. Then he stood there. For 30 full seconds, he just stood there, staring into the dark. Then he suddenly flinched, like he realized something, and slammed the door shut before hurrying away. I called the police. Mr. Holloway insisted it was a mistake. Said he thought he heard a noise from my apartment and wanted to check if I was safe. The officers didn't buy it. They found a whole ring of keys in his apartment, copies for every unit in the building. I moved out that same day. A few months later, I checked the building's rental listings out of curiosity. The ad for my old apartment was up again. No mention of why the last tenant left.